Sergio Perez has continued with his miserable qualifying form, missing out on Q3 for the 5th race in a row, and the talks about him being replaced have resurfaced all over again. Considering the fact that Verstappen is now single-handedly leading everyone in the Constructors' Championship, Red Bull might not need Perez for a longer period of time, and if he keeps showing flaws like this, the impatience of Red Bull will appear yet again, as there are already possible suitors for his seat. But is Verstappen responsible for everything that is currently happening to Perez, and what was the latest bombshell he dropped on his teammate? The previous race was definitely one of the worst qualifying experiences for Perez, aside from Monaco, as he exited Q1 and finished P16. True, you could argue that the team made a bad move by sending him out on the slick tyre to be the first driver to set the fastest lap, and as everyone else behind him was on a warmer tyre, it wasn't that hard to knock Perez's time down. Still, having the 16th fastest time on the grid while your teammate is out there cruising with a 1 second difference to his rivals is definitely the biggest contrast that you could possibly witness in Formula 1. And that's exactly what could see Perez get his seat taken away sooner rather than later. Verstappen's dominance is undisputed, and there is no doubt that he is a generational talent that you'd have an extremely hard time going against. However, from a car like the RB19, you'd at least expect it to finish constantly in second place, just like Perez did in the first couple of races when he wasn't winning in Baku and Jeddah, with the exception of Australia and his first qualifying blunder that put him way behind Verstappen. Nonetheless, Perez doesn't seem to be in gel with the car, something that's definitely hurting his possibility of remaining in Red Bull. And although everyone below him is struggling to generate pace and challenge him for P2, including Fernando Alonso in the last couple of races, this is by no means a guarantee that Perez will remain in Red Bull. Mark Webber, the former Red Bull driver and the current manager of Oscar Piastri, was the first to comment on the situation with the Mexican driver, saying that an old fart like himself, who's way deep into his 40s, would finish solid with the RB19. And if Perez doesn't start delivering solid results in qualifying, then that P2 spot in the Drivers' Championship could be gone very soon. The sole reason why Red Bull are more or less keeping the Mexican driver at bay right now. But Verstappen feels like he doesn't need the help of Perez, and during the previous race, he was asked about whether or not he feels bad about his teammate's recent slump of performance, a question to which I think you already know the answer. But furthermore, Verstappen didn't seem to stop here, and said that he doesn't need the help of Perez to lead the Constructors' Championship fight because he himself has more points than the second place team, Mercedes, by a margin of 52. When talking about his teammates' lack of performance, Verstappen went on to say, "You have to ask Helmut or Christian about that. We're fighting for the team championship, but I think I can do that alone at the moment." And remember, these statements were made before the beginning of the Silverstone GP, and right now, Verstappen is keeping the lead to Mercedes on a very stable note. And considering the fact that Perez did contribute a solid amount of points from Silverstone by finishing P6, this is not what we're here to see from him. He's not comfortable with the car, and for the first time in the past 2 years, it's not actually the car's design or the philosophy of it. It's the loss of confidence and motivation to drive. Now, when talking about his bad performance in Silverstone, especially after the qualifying session, Perez went on to say, "The red flag lasted a lot longer than we initially thought, so we ended up waiting a lot longer, and that was a bit unfortunate. These conditions are where I struggle the most. The changeable conditions are something that we need to get on top of when we're able to do better." Well, I'm afraid that if these changeable conditions continue to happen in the next races, then Perez might not live to see another day in Red Bull, and the contrast in his performance has been very obvious compared to the first couple of races, in which he won 2 out of the 4 events that were held in 2023. Now, after the Baku GP, the latest win for Perez, he was just 6 points behind Verstappen, and considering the fact that he started first in Miami and Verstappen was 9th, everybody thought that this would be the race in which Perez would definitely put himself in front of the championship lead. And that's something Perez believed in as well. But the amazing performance of Verstappen and him taking the lead of the race in less than half of the laps being driven has definitely shattered Perez's self-confidence, as the Mexican himself went on to admit that he cannot do the things that Verstappen does in the RB19, especially not after what he saw in Miami. All of this prompts the question, will we see Perez being replaced soon, and who could be the best candidate to do that? As of now, it's evident that Ricciardo is the loudest name whenever the Perez topic pops up in the news. And as Horner said, bringing back Ricciardo from McLaren was one of the best things the team did because he's doing a very underappreciated job back at the simulator and trying to set up the car in the best possible way for both Verstappen and Perez. But if he manages to prove that he has what it takes to be that guy for Red Bull, as his hunger and motivation are now definitely much higher compared to Perez, we could see him reunite with Verstappen for the first time after the 2018 season. This is something that Verstappen believes in as well, as the Dutchman was asked about whether or not he thinks Ricciardo is a good suitor for the seat, and he answered, "He's doing a good job in the simulator, but you know, that's not something I'm amazed about either. He obviously had some difficult years at McLaren, but you don't lose your talent. He also has a lot of experience. I think he's just comfortable with us at the moment. I also know Daniel very well, so we can talk about a lot of things." One thing that Verstappen can do with Ricciardo, and definitely cannot do with Perez, is bond and talk about a lot of things. Because ever since Perez crashed deliberately during the qualifying session in Monaco last year to keep the advantage over Verstappen, it seems like the team's chemistry has hit an all-time low, and they're basically two different drivers at this point, unwilling to help each other if that's needed. Now, this is very common in teams that have a championship winning car in their hands, and don't think that it won't be the case in Ferrari or Mercedes if they're able to fight for race wins at the top. But when one of the drivers is slacking off massively, then it's definitely worth thinking about replacing him. With Verstappen's dominance, Perez's lost motivation, and Ricciardo's increased hunger to return to the sport, what comes next for the Austrian team? They do have a couple of more talents that they can look out for, such as Liam Lawson, who is now racing in Super Formula, and Alex Palou, who is now in the IndyCar 500. And to be honest with you, I wouldn't be surprised if Albon is brought back, as we've seen how much he's matured as a driver in Williams, extracting everything out of a car that's definitely one of the worst out there. But with Ricciardo opening up about his future and saying that he would definitely accept the alternative way of returning to the sport, which is to drive for AlphaTauri and then hop in Red Bull, it's definitely an opportunity for Red Bull that they might not want to miss. Ricciardo understands his role in Red Bull now, and if you were to give him Perez's seat and role as the second driver of the team, he would gladly sign it and compete for P2 constantly, as we know what kind of impact the McLaren experience left on him. All in all, Perez has the hottest seat in F1 right now, and his teammate performing the way he does makes it only harder for the Mexican driver to prove that he's worth it for the Austrian team. So, do you think that a replacement is on his way after Verstappen's dominance is enough to keep Mercedes at bay in P2? Let us know in the comments down below.